When you think about walking into a haunted house, you have, like, very specific expectations.
Oh, absolutely. You're immediately bracing for the jump scares.
Yeah, you expect the eerie music, the feeling that something malicious is lurking right behind you in the dark. The whole physical environment is basically engineered to make you feel threatened.
Right. It preys on our most primal survival instincts. You are stepping into this unknown space where, well, the primary rule is that you are the prey.
But imagine you walk through those creaky doors, bracing yourself for a monster, and instead you find uh, a massive, bustling community potluck.
That is quite the pivot.
Right. People are handing out fresh fruit, they're singing on a brightly lit stage, and they're moving through the crowd just to make sure everyone, even the strangers who wandered in off the street, has enough to eat. I mean, it's extreme, almost aggressive hospitality replacing sheer terror.
Which completely recontextualizes the entire space. You are no longer defending yourself, you're actually being invited to participate in a communal act of care.
And that pivot is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. Today we are immersing ourselves in the Zongguin Festival.
Or, as you probably know it, by its much more cinematic, arguably misleading name, the Hungry Ghost Festival.
Exactly. Which, for context, takes place over the entire 7th lunar month. So this year, it starts on August 13th, with Ghost Day falling on August 27th. And we have some fantastic sources today. I was reading a really fascinating breakdown from the Singapore Cultural Heritage Archives, alongside some incredibly grounding recent interviews in Asia One.
Both of which provide amazing context.
They really do. And our mission today is to look past all that spooky folklore of roaming spirits. We're going to uncover the deep history, some truly surprising logistical quirks, and the modern cultural evolution of this massive observance. So, okay, let's unpack this, because a festival that is so often associated with fear and hiding indoors is fundamentally rooted in profound compassion.
It really is. The gulf between the public perception of this festival and the actual, mechanical reality of it is just vast.
Yeah.
And to understand how that gap formed, we have to examine the single most famous piece of folklore attached to the entire month, which is the idea that the gates of hell swing wide open to let spirits flood our realm.
Right. The story always goes that on the first day of the 7th lunar month, the gates of the netherworld just burst open, and spirits roam completely unchecked to look for food and entertainment. But diving into these sources, I found myself, questioning the mechanics of this.
How so?
Well, is this essentially supposed to be a supernatural jailbreak? It just seems chaotic to have an entire theology built around spirits roaming completely free with zero supervision.
Yeah, that chaotic jailbreak narrative is exactly what the general public assumes, but it's actually a massive structural misconception.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, the Asia One interviews provide some brilliant clarity on this by speaking with Li Qitong. He's a 27-year-old ordained Taoist priest, which immediately gives us this really fresh, modern lens on an ancient tradition.
Oh, that's a cool perspective. So what does he say?
He breaks down the actual mechanics of what happens, and it turns out the open hellgates idea is a complete misunderstanding of a highly controlled religious procedure.
Okay, so if the gates aren't just left wide open like a busted dam, I want to understand what the priests are actually doing on the ground. I mean, there has to be a physical ritual that sparked this widespread rumor, right?
There is, yeah. Taoist priests conduct highly specific rituals known as po diu, which translates to hell-breaking rituals.
Hell-breaking. That sounds pretty intense.
It does, but they are not blasting the doors off the hinges for a spiritual free-for-all. The ritual actually involves breaking spiritual barriers to summon very specific souls from the netherworld. The priests use talismans, chanting, and physical movements to create a targeted bridge.
Ah, to call forth specific ancestors so they can be helped or appeased.
Exactly.
I see. So it's a targeted summons, like a judge issuing a specific subpoena for one person rather than a warden just unlocking every single cell block in the present.
That's a perfect analogy.
But if these rituals are so targeted and specific, that creates a serious historical telephone game. Why did the public start believing the gates were permanently jammed open?
You really have to look at this geographically and chronologically. During peak migration and settlement periods in places like Singapore and Malaysia, these padiyu rituals were being conducted all over the region by various priests.
Okay.
So the public, seeing these localized hell-breaking rituals happening simultaneously in almost every single neighborhood, simply extrapolated. They saw 100 individual doors being opened and naturally concluded that the main gates of hell must be entirely gone.
Wow, that makes so much sense. I am struggling with the math of the timeline here, though. If these are just specific targeted summons, Why does the festival span an entire month?
It is a long time.
Yeah, a full 30 days of observance seems like an incredibly long, resource-heavy period just to sustain targeted rituals.
Hmm.
Was there, like, a theological mandate requiring 30 days?
The answer has absolutely nothing to do with supernatural mandates. It is entirely about earthly, bureaucratic bottlenecks.
Wait, a bureaucratic bottleneck? What do you mean?
Well, Li Qitong points out a really fascinating demographic reality. In the earlier days of Singapore and Malaysia, there simply were not enough fully ordained, highly trained Taoist priests to perform all of these necessary, highly complex rituals on a single day.
Wait, are we talking about a literal supply chain issue? The demand for salvation outpaced the spiritual workforce.
Precisely. You had a massive growing population of immigrants who deeply wanted to honor their ancestors, but a severe shortage of qualified religious specialists.
And I imagine a Poti ritual isn't something an amateur can just step in and do.
No, it requires intense training. So because of this severe manpower shortage, the priests had to stagger their schedules. They started moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, precinct to precinct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and over the years, this logistical necessity stretched what could have been a brief observance into a grueling month-long marathon.
That reframes the entire mythology for me. Practical human limitations actually shaped the religious folklore. We literally took a scheduling conflict, like a spiritual DMV backlog, and over the generations, society retrofitted a grand mythological narrative about spirits requiring 30 days to roam the earth.
It really is a brilliant example of humans adapting their spiritual practices to the reality of their physical constraints. And, that theme of physical, earthly realities driving spiritual practices ties perfectly into the origins of the offerings themselves.
Right, because before this became an urban phenomenon involving paper sports cars and giant street tents, it was deeply tethered to the soil.
Very much so.
So, since we now know the mechanical why behind the month-long timeline, we need to trace the what is actually being offered. The Singapore archives show that the roots of the 7th lunar month are not inherently spooky or death-focused at all. This period originally coincided with a crucial month of agricultural harvest in ancient agrarian societies.
So picture a farming community whose entire survival depends on the yield of their crops. They have labored all season, and they're finally pulling the harvest from the earth.
Right.
The very first action they took was not to feed themselves, but to offer their absolute best, pristine first harvest to their ancestors as a form of profound respect and gratitude.
It's like taking the very first, most perfect slice of a hard-earned cake and giving it to the generation that planted the original seeds.
Exactly.
But the aspect of this that truly resonates is how the boundaries of that offering shifted. It didn't just remain a closed-loop family affair. It morphed into, well, an ancient community potluck that continually expanded its guest list out of pure empathy.
Empathy is really the driving force here, because these early observers recognized a tragic reality in their communities. There were wandering spirits, ancestors of broken family lines who had no living descendants to feed them.
So there was no one left on Earth to offer them that first slice of the harvest.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you begin to see a divergence in how different philosophical and religious traditions interpret this core act of leaving food out.
The Singapore Heritage Source breaks this down into two distinct lenses dominant in Singapore, right? The Taoist perspective and the Buddhist perspective. They share the same month, but their internal mechanisms and ultimate goals are quite different.
Yes. The Taoist side leans heavily into the mechanics of appeasement, but more importantly, into formal repentance.
Which culminates on the 15th day of the 7th month, widely known as Ghost Day. In Taoist theology, this day is the birthday of Diguanda Di, the Earth Official.
The role of Diguanda Di is crucial because he holds the authority to forgive sins and wrongdoings. So on this specific day, the rituals shift. It's less about just feeding hungry wanderers and more about an active, solemn process of clearing the slate.
Right, so Taoist priests conduct rituals to help both the living and the dead formally repent, seeking absolution from the Earth Official. It's like an inward-looking, highly structured process of cosmic auditing.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the Buddhist perspective, which is heavily championed by groups like Suchi Singapore, shifts the lens entirely away from seeking personal absolution or appeasing fearful entities.
Their focus during the 7th lunar month is rooted in the concept of ulambana, right? It's fundamentally about expressing filial piety, cultivating personal virtue, and projecting boundless compassion toward all sentient beings.
It replaces the fear of the unknown with a universal, unconditional duty of care. For Buddhist practitioners, it's a reminder that suffering exists in all realms, and the highest virtue is to alleviate that suffering, whether for your direct ancestors or for spirits you have absolutely no blood relation to.
Which brings up a massive structural contradiction in how this festival is celebrated today.
Oh, how so?
Well, if the core philosophies here are rooted in quiet, solemn repentance, agricultural gratitude, and deep spiritual empathy, how on earth do we end up with blaring street concerts, strobe lights, and massive boisterous dinner banquets? Those elements seem fundamentally at odds with the quiet reverence of the origins.
I mean, they do seem at odds until you realize that the festival evolved to serve the social architecture of the living just as much as the spiritual needs of the departed.
Okay, that makes sense.
The massive neighborhood events you see popping up all over modern Singapore, which typically feature a dinner, a loud auction, and a Getai performance, they are mechanisms for urban community building.
Let's actually break down the mechanics of those dinners, known in Hokkien as Jiact Tok Tiam. This isn't just a catered event, is it?
Not at all. Business owners and residents in a specific precinct physically pool their financial resources to purchase mass offerings. Sacks of rice, gallons of oil, canned goods, fresh fruits, towering stalks of sugarcane.
And after the spiritual rituals conclude, these tangible goods are distributed among the participants.
Yeah, it acts as an informal social safety net and a massive reinforcement of communal bonds. You are symbolically feeding the spirits, but practically, you are feeding your actual neighbors. It builds a localized trust network.
And nothing builds or tests a localized network quite like the street auctions. If you have never witnessed one, the atmosphere is electric and incredibly loud. Organizing committees auction off items that have been blessed during the rituals, specifically to raise capital for the following year's festival expenses.
The economics of how people bid on these items is fascinating, though.
Right. They are paying exorbitant prices for seemingly mundane things, like a piece of charcoal or a single orange.
Well, the high bids make perfect sense when you understand the spiritual return on investment the bidders are seeking. I mean, they aren't buying an orange for its nutritional value.
Obviously not.
The auction bidders view their winning bids as a charitable donation to the community's spiritual well-being. By funding next year's communal worship, they believe they are securing good luck, smooth business operations, and protection for themselves. It is a cyclical, highly visible investment in community goodwill.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The entertainment that follows the auction. The Getai performances. For you listening, Getai literally translates to song stage. And today it is a live, extremely vibrant, high-decibel street concert.
It is very loud.
But tracing its history through these sources reveals a wild roller coaster of cultural evolution. Because Getai did not start on the streets as a grassroots neighborhood pop-up.
Not at all. The DNA of Getai in Singapore dates back to the early 1940s, but it truly industrialized and boomed in the 50s alongside the broader post-war economy. In that era, Getai was premium, centralized entertainment.
It was hosted inside Singapore's three iconic permanent amusement parks, right? Happy World, New World, and Great World.
Exactly. They were massive variety shows. You had singing, intricate dancing, acrobatics, and comedic skits.
And they were heavily influenced by the glamorous pop culture flowing in from Hong Kong and Taiwan, performed primarily in local dialects. It was the absolute pinnacle of local nightlife.
So how does a premium amusement park variety show become the soundtrack for a month dedicated to wandering ghosts? Well, by the 1960s and 70s, the amusement parks began to wane. But the performers still needed an audience, and the Hungry Ghost Festival organizers desperately needed entertainment to keep the crowds at the auctions.
Traditionally, the festival relied on ritualistic performances like Teochew opera, Hokkien opera, or traditional glove puppetry, right?
Yes. These were solemn, beautiful, but increasingly seen as very slow-paced by the younger, rapidly modernizing generation.
So Getai swooped in, offering loud, fast-paced, dialect-heavy pop culture, and effectively replaced the traditional operas on the street corners.
That's exactly what happened. And by the 80s, Getai was the undisputed grassroots king of the seventh month. It resonated deeply with the working class because it was entertainment by the everyman, for the everyman, speaking their specific linguistic dialects.
But diving into the Asian archives reveals that this massive cultural juggernaut almost died entirely in the late 1990s.
It hit a severe institutional wall. As Singapore rapidly developed its legal and regulatory frameworks, authorities began strictly enforcing copyright laws.
Oh.
Getai organizers, who operated on very tight community-funded budgets, were suddenly mandated to pay musical license fees to organizations like Compass for the pop songs they were performing.
That creates immense financial friction. I mean, you are taking a grassroots, spiritually funded street concert and applying corporate licensing structures to it. It threatened the very economic model that kept the festival free for the public.
It did. And they didn't just face financial hurdles. The authorities also imposed a strict 10:30 p.m. noise curfew.
Which is devastating for a festival whose entire premise is about the night. Between the sudden surge in operating costs and the hard stop at 10:30 p.m., the atmosphere just deflated.
The younger crowds stopped showing up, the organizers couldn't afford top talent, and the tradition severely stagnated.
It was on life support. But then the early 2000s arrived, and cinema quite literally saved the street culture. Singaporean director Royston Tan released a film called 881, centered entirely around the dramatic, sequin-studded lives of Gatai singers.
Oh, that movie was huge.
It became an absolute blockbuster. It took this aging, administratively burdened tradition and injected it with neon, high drama, and undeniable cool.
The cultural impact of 891 really cannot be overstated. It functioned as a massive rebranding campaign for Gatai.
Yeah.
Suddenly, younger generations who had dismissed the street concerts as something only their grandparents cared about were crowding the tents. It sparked a renaissance that ultimately led to Gatai being officially recognized as an intangible cultural heritage element in Singapore. It survived the regulatory crackdown purely because it captured the cultural zeitgeist.
It is an incredible story of resilience. But, navigating this entire month isn't just about showing up to bid on an orange or watch a revived Gatai concert. For anyone trying to go about their daily life in a hyperdense city like Singapore during the 7th lunar month, there's a complex matrix of traditions and warnings to navigate.
We definitely have to examine the taboos.
Yes, the taboos.
They are perhaps the most pervasive aspect of the festival for the average citizen. They are the older generation's strict guardrails, passed down primarily through fear and folklore, dictating what you absolutely cannot do during these 30 days.
If you grew up in this region, the list is seared into your brain. First and foremost, absolutely no swimming.
The underlying mechanic here is a belief in water ghosts, which are the spirits of people who drowned.
Right. The folklore suggests these spirits are trapped in the water and can only reincarnate if they pull an unlucky swimmer down to take their place as a substitute.
It is an incredibly potent psychological deterrent. It was designed originally in rural areas to keep children away from dangerous rivers and strong tides during specific seasons.
That makes total sense. You also have strict social taboos, no getting married, and absolutely no moving into a new house. The structural logic here is about avoiding unwanted spiritual attention, right?
Exactly. If you throw a loud, joyous celebration or leave the doors to a new property wide open, you run the very real risk of wandering spirits crashing the wedding. Or worse, deciding to permanently occupy your new living room.
Which fundamentally disrupts the goal of a marriage or a new home, which is creating a safe, controlled, and auspicious environment for your family.
Right.
There are also aesthetic rules, like avoiding completely black or completely red clothing, as those specific frequencies of color are thought to serve as a beacon for spirits.
Right.
And the most heavily enforced rule of all, avoid staying out late.
Because the streets after dark belong to the wanderers, and you really do not want your paths to cross. This raises an important question, though.
Oh.
How do we, living in a modern, hyper-dense, 24-hour urban metropolis, actually balance these deeply ingrained ancient superstitions with the realities of daily life? I mean, you cannot simply shut down the economy or empty the streets of a major global city for an entire month.
Yeah, how does a teenager living on the 30th floor of a high-rise handle the swimming taboo when their building has a communal pool?
It creates a fascinating sociological friction. What the sources indicate is that modern adherence often comes down to maintaining social harmony rather than harboring genuine religious terror.
There is a deeply pragmatic Chinese proverb often cited during this time, right? It's better to believe it exists than to believe it does not.
Yes. For many younger urbanites, avoiding the pool or skipping a late-night outing isn't about a literal fear of a water ghost dragging them under. It's a calculated act of respect. It is about keeping the peace with their anxious parents and grandparents who hold those fears deeply.
It becomes an exercise in intergenerational empathy. But beyond the supernatural don'ts, there's an entirely separate category of very tangible physical do's that have emerged to manage the festival's footprint in a concrete jungle. The sheer volume of fire and food involved requires strict modern etiquette.
Fire safety is the absolute paramount concern. A core practice involves burning Jots paper, which isn't just stacks of paper money anymore.
No, people burn incredibly elaborate, life-sized paper effigies of luxury mansions, sports cars, the latest smartphones, and designer clothes to send to the netherworld. Burning a paper Ferrari on the sidewalk of a densely populated residential block is a massive hazard.
Which is why town councils provide heavy, designated metal burners placed on sturdy, non-flammable ground, carefully distanced from residential premises. It is just a logistical necessity to prevent urban fires.
And then you have the biological reality of the food offerings. Leaving a plate of roast pork and open cans of stout by a tree might have been fine in a rural farming village. But doing that in a dense public housing estate and leaving it there for days creates a severe pest control issue.
It attracts rats, cockroaches, and birds. It creates genuine public health friction. The modern rule is that you must clean up your offerings after the rituals are complete.
And equally pressing is the issue of smoke. In high-rise living, irresponsible open-air burning of joss paper creates thick, acrid smoke that drifts straight up into the open windows of lower-floor apartments.
For neighbors with asthma or respiratory conditions, a month of heavy burning is a serious health crisis. It requires a delicate balancing act, honoring your ancestors without actively harming the living person whose apartment is directly above the incinerator.
In fact, Buddhist groups like Tzu Chi Singapore have taken a really strong stance on this, actively advocating for practitioners to significantly reduce their carbon footprint during the seventh month.
Right. They promote environmentally mindful spirituality, encouraging digital offerings, or simply burning much less physical material.
It is a profound evolution of the practice. The core underlying value, compassion for the suffering, remains entirely intact, but the physical execution is actively adapting to the environmental and social realities of the 21st century.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? When we look back at the mechanics, the history, and the evolution we've unpacked today, it becomes incredibly clear that the Hungry Ghost Festival is the furthest thing from a month of terror.
Not at all.
It is not a horror movie designed to make you hide in your house.
Yeah.
It is, at its absolute core, a profound, continuous exercise in human empathy. It is about logistical resilience, community hospitality, sharing resources, and finding structural ways to deeply remember those who came before us.
It's a mirror reflecting how society cares for its most vulnerable, both seen and unseen, from ancient farmers leaving their first precious harvest on a dirt road to modern business owners pooling thousands of dollars for neighborhood banquets. The urge to care for others is the unbreakable through line.
Yeah.
But observing how radically the methods have evolved leaves you with one final, complex puzzle to ponder.
I am curious where this logic leads us next.
Well, think about the trajectory. We evolved from offering simple bowls of rice to burning multi-story paper mansions. We evolved from slow, traditional street puppetry to massive, neon-lit pop culture get-high concerts fueled by cinema.
Right.
If the traditions adapt this aggressively to match the living world, how will we appease the spirits 50 years from now? As we move into an increasingly digitized, hyper-dense, and strictly environmentally conscious future, the heavy smoke and physical paper effigies might simply become unsustainable.
That is a staggering thought. If the physical limitations force another adaptation, what replaces the paper sports car?
Might we one day see fully immersive virtual reality rituals where families gather in digital spaces to present offerings?
Oh, wow.
Could we be burning digital tokens or sending merit and financial appeasement to the ancestors via an immutable blockchain ledger, completely eliminating the carbon footprint while preserving the theological intent?
A decentralized ledger for the netherworld. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but if the spirits successfully adapted from Teochew opera to Royston Tan movies, there's no reason to believe they won't adapt to a digital harvest as well. It is a brilliant concept to chew on the next time you walk past a burner on the street. Remember, you aren't navigating a haunted house. You are just passing through the latest iteration of a very ancient, very resilient community potluck. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.